Wow, that was a lot of contrast in this piece. It was so exciting and so eloquent. So tell us, Alexandre, what is next on the program?
The next piece I've chosen, I think it is also truly representing of another wonderful and expansive period in music that is pivotal to music history. This would be the classical era. Oftentimes, this is referred to in the humanities as the Enlightenment. So now, there was a small transition between the Baroque era and the classical era known as the Rococo. But it is within the classical period that things took a definite course towards change. Perhaps the philosophies of the time, which concur between 1730 and 1820, were starting to change drastically, really dramatically. Perhaps when we think of the French philosopher René Descartes and his famous phrase "Cogito ergo sum, je pense donc je suis," or in English, "Think therefore I am," this becomes true to the society when reasoning becomes the main model of building a society and religion becomes less and less important. It is a time of reasoning where logic becomes the leading reference for society. And the religious aspects, again, of the world start losing more power and interest, or at least more than the ones they held prior from this period. Science, of course, becomes prevalent and most important. And in any case, they help create an idea of refinement for society, mankind, and also for the aesthetics that people, artists, and just people from every walks of life were striving to find. This can be perceived in the readings and ideas of many of the most important philosophers of the time. If we think of Voltaire, who was writing and attacking the church in many different ways, when we think of Rousseau, who is very famous for Les Bons Sauvages, who perceived that society was being contaminated and that men had to again reconnect with mother nature, and he had all these crazy ideas as to what society should look like. We have also Montesquieu, who's striving to define political context and create different ideas of functionalities when it came to building righteous government. When we think of Kant, perhaps, then we are talking about someone who believed that we were rational beings and that we deserved respect and dignity. So again, this is a period that becomes a completely different animal in many, many different respects. So to represent this time period in music, I have chosen a piece by the composer Franz Joseph Haydn.
Well, thank you for that reference. So, what can you tell us about Haydn and why did you choose this particular piece?
Haydn is one of the most central composers of the classical era. He gets two important epithets that reflect the level of importance that he had. He's known as the father of the symphony and also as the father of the string quartet. Oftentimes, he also just gets the name of Papa Haydn. This is because he wrote 107 symphonies and 83 string quartets. This is a much wider number than that of perhaps Mozart and later Beethoven. We know that Mozart only completed 41 symphonies and Beethoven only wrote 9, so I think Haydn is already beating them by a whole lot here. I think it is also important to know that both of these amazing composers, which are perhaps two of the grandest names you'll hear in the scope of the history of the world and humanity, they were both students of Mr. Haydn. So he was really, really, truly important in even educating two of the greatest geniuses that were going to take over after him. He was very lucky because he secured an important job with a very famous and wealthy family who were his patrons. These were the Esterhazy family. He served and worked for them for over 30 years and had an amazing court of musicians at his disposition. So Haydn was really having a lot of time composing and creating wonderful pieces of arts that we can enjoy today.
Wow, this is incredible to hear that he actually taught some of the greatest composers who ever lived. And how would you describe his music or music during this time in history?
Well, the classical era, since it was, after all, a time of reasoning, balance, and symmetry, has very specific characteristics. Music becomes very organized, and in many ways, you can appreciate the sound of royalty in it. Music becomes homophonic, which is based on a melodic line with chordal accompaniment. Therefore, there is a lot of honesty and transparency in the music. Textures also become much lighter and refined than those in the Baroque era that were so heavy with the counterpoint and very busy lines. Here we have dynamics also that become more connected and varied. So we have lines that try to go up, others that try to go down. So when we think of maybe a painting, we could think of the technique of sfumato, where there is more blending of these colors.
So, Alexandre, what will you be playing for us next?
I will be playing the first movement of a piece written originally for the cello. This is one out of two concertos written by Hayden for the cello. Sadly, he did not compose anything for the viola, but he does give the viola a very important role within the world of the string quartet. So I'm assuming he did have and he did see a lot of potential within the viola and the expressive tools that the viola has to offer. I think Haydn um, saw some of this potential and singing capacities on the viola. So what you hear tonight is my own transcription of this cello concerto. We have very few standard works actually written for the viola during this era, during the classical era, such as the works by Stamitz and Hofmeister, as well as a Sinfonia Concertante written by Mozart for solo violin and solo viola. Therefore, I felt like we had nothing representing Haydn's music, which is one of my favorite composers of all times. So I took upon the task of transcribing this work in hopes of showing that the viola can also express and to give violists out there new ideas as to what they can do to enrich and enlarge our repertoire by creating their own editions of other pieces that weren't perhaps originally written for the viola. This piece was written between 1761 and 1765. It is in the key of C major. It has three movements. I'm only performing the first movement today, which is marked as moderato. It is extremely lyrical and beautiful in its temperament. At the end of the first movement, you'll also hear a cadenza. So a cadenza is an improvisation that soloists of this time frame would just take upon themselves to create a little improvisation based on the themes presented by the piece. So in this case, you'll be hearing my own improvisation, which is based on the first cadenza ever written for the edition created by the cellist Milo Sadlo.
Well, I couldn't be more excited to hear a piece that was originally written for the cello and now being performed by a violist. Please take it away.